Welcome to the Opportunity Podcast, where entrepreneurs come to learn from real buyers, sellers, and industry experts on the lesser-known growth opportunities to build their online business empires. We'll uncover tactics veteran online business entrepreneurs have used to build, buy, flip, and sell their way towards personal wealth. Sit back, grab a coffee, and get ready to uncover hidden growth secrets. The Opportunity Podcast starts now.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Opportunity Podcast, your go-to resource for hidden growth opportunities throughout online business. For those familiar or new to the podcast, I'm Sarah, and thanks for joining me today. In today's episode, content site expert Doron Wolffberg returns to the show to share the unique insights he gained from a business he recently sold on the Empire Flippers marketplace. He gives us a behind-the-scenes look at how the deal went down and how he was able to sell the business at full listing price in just one day to a first-time buyer. Doron also reveals some other important tips and tricks that can help content site owners close the deal faster on the sale of their online businesses. I don't want to give away too much just yet, so let's go ahead and dig into the interview, and I'll let Doron take it away. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Opportunity Podcast. Really excited to have today's guest on the show, Doron Wolffberg. Doron has been on the podcast before and he's very familiar with Empire Flippers, so it's good to have a friend back on. Doron, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. For those who don't know, where are you calling in from in the world?
I'm calling from Tel Aviv, Israel.
Awesome. Tel Aviv, absolutely awesome city. Well, cool. So, I would love to hear a little bit more about your background. I understand that you got it and started in the world of being a chef for Michelin star restaurants. How did you go from that to working into online businesses?
Oh, yeah, that was a long time ago. Basically, after I was released from military service here in Israel, I was looking for jobs. I got to work in a job as assistant chef here in Israel. My uncle is a pretty famous chef here, so I kind of followed in his footsteps and worked my way up there. So I eventually worked in some of the higher end restaurants in Israel, got connected to Europe, worked in Michelin star restaurants in France and Denmark for a while, including Noma. There's a really cool MAA, Ask Me Anything, on Reddit. So if you Google that, like Noma, Ask Me Anything, you see my experience there. It's pretty cool. And from there, eventually, I went back to get my college degree, studied economics, saw that wanted for me, and then online marketing and SEO was the perfect fit since.
Awesome. Wow, that's super cool. Now I'm really curious about that AMA. I would love to see what juicy stuff is in there. I understand today, you're deep in the online space. You've got a portfolio of sites and you're working and you have your own company called Cliverse Media. Tell me about the sites that make up your portfolio currently and what projects you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So Cliverse Media, we're based out of Israel, co-founded the company along with two partners also based here. What makes us unique is our focus in the pet industry. We really targeted there. We have, I think, one of the largest pet-specific content teams. We do manage our own sites on that portfolio. And apart from that, we also have the agency side where we give various types of marketing services like SEM, SEO, content creation, design, all specific for the pet industry.
Oh, that's super interesting. Very cool that you're working so deeply in the pet industry. It's such a kind of a vibrant niche. I'm always jealous of people who have sites in that niche. It always seems like they're doing really well. I'm curious. This might feel like a generalized question. I understand that your portfolio, you're really focused in on a particular niche, but it sounds like more like content sites. I'm wondering what about this business model really resonates with you, and why is being in the content space an exciting place to be? And say we're almost in 2022, but basically 2022 in this point in time.
Well, I think there is two things. One, let's talk about the pet niche for a second. Fast growing niche, worth over $100 billion in annual revenue, expected to hit 115 or 120, this upcoming year. In 5 years, it's expected to go over $150 billion per year in the US. That's bigger than health supplements, for example. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, when you look at content, specifically blogs, content sites, there's a couple of things that super interesting. One is the relatively high margin, the cost of operation margin to profits are typically much better than other types of business model like FBA, e-commerce. I think the only one, maybe just info products might sometimes have like a similar ratio, but like across the board, it's by far the most profitable. And the second thing is, there's a true opportunity to really educate. So, in my niche, it's to educate pet parents, but, even if you look at other niches where you provide content, then apart from, just the revenue aspect, there's a real opportunity, to provide good in educational content. And that's something that today, users, they really appreciate it. So it's a great way to build a real community around your business through content and through education.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a really interesting answer. I mean, I understand that you're doing so much in this space, including buying and selling. You've done a lot of transactions on our marketplace, for example. I was wondering if we could narrow in on a business that you sold recently with Empire Flippers. Would you tell me a little bit about that business that you were selling?
Yeah, sure. So it was one of our smaller content sites. And it's a site we've had, I think it was launched in 2017 or 2018. Had that for a while. It was a really good site. We ended up listing it for a couple of reasons. The main one was that we wanted to kind of narrow down our portfolio to focus just like on our biggest side, and then also to focus more on the agency side of the business that has been growing really fast in the past few months. Yeah, so we ended up listing that site with Empire Flippers. And what happens next, where we can kind of get into it on the whole selling, the process of selling it, that was really interesting. I think was different than how most content sites are being sold on the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe this ties into the next question. I wanted to set this up before we get there. It's just what the state of the website was. Was this a website that was going pretty strong? Was it in decline? Were there maybe like any issues at hand?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of declining. It was kind of, let's say, like we weren't giving it enough attention. We were focusing on other projects. So it kind of felt time to let it go. And it was being maintained, but it wasn't getting enough attention that it needs, to grow into something bigger and more substantial.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it makes sense if that was the state of the website. Of course, a natural next step would be let's try to exit this and let it move on to someone else. So, walk me through that. When you went to go sell this site, what started to unfold that was really unusual to the other deals that you had done?
Well, in terms of listing it, I think it was pretty straightforward. It wasn't very different than other sites we sold on the platform from that perspective. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was thinking just even getting to like the deal process, right? So you've listed the sale on our marketplace and what started happening next? What was like the buyer attention like? And, what buyer started to pay attention to the website that, basically a new relationship started to unfold?
We went live, then we started to get a growing interest on the listing. I was a fairly popular listing because of the niche and the price range. It was priced below $100,000. I would say in that price range, those are very popular just because content sites are fairly simple to operate, and that kind of price range is relevant also for newbies, people that they're looking to acquire the first online business, as well as other more seasoned operators. So we started to get a lot of interest. And then the interesting thing was like one of the interests came from someone that were absolutely new to the space. They were looking to purchase their first business. They wanted a content site. They liked that site specifically just because of the quality of the content, the overall quality of the design. It kind of stood out from, other content sites that are listed. Because I think a lot of SEO sites, they're really, SEO oriented. So they don't care as much about like the design, the look and feel of the site. They're just focusing, on their SEO metrics and producing more content and the pure revenue side of it. And I think that side kind of stood up. And then we got into a conversation. And then once I realized, this person really they're not very experienced. They don't have, the skill set required to operate that. They'll need to learn everything on the spot. So it was really important for me to really have a call with this person and to really explain everything that has to do with operating the business, as well as other things that are typically not talked about, like how much you should invest in the business after you acquired it, the current state of the business, why it's, just like kind of steadily declining, what you need to do to get that traffic up in a positive trend again. Because when you build an acquisition plan, it doesn't end when you purchase the business, right? Then there's the operating cost of the business. So a lot of businesses also have drawbacks that are related. But as a buyer, you kind of have to look at that and understand, okay, so there are drawbacks, but I do need to invest in some additional growth opportunities to actually increase the revenue of the site. And especially when you look at a niche like pets, for example, just imagine how many new pet sites the people set up every day just because it's such a popular niche. So if you really just plan on maintaining the business, like not doing nothing, enjoying the cash flow, that's nice for, maybe 6 to 12 months. But after that, you are very vulnerable to the future algorithm updates. So that's like a whole range of things that you need to be aware as a first time buyer, which I think most first time buyers are not fully aware, and they're not fully aware of the risk associated. So that was very important for me to really cover every single aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, all that is super interesting, Doron. I think what really sticks out to me is that you approached this from the buyer's perspective, somebody who knows well what it's like to be kind of on both sides. Now, it's funny because I bet you've run into a lot of people who were like, why would you give so much assistance? Or why would you coach the buyer in that way or warn them about the investments you'd make in the site? Like, wouldn't that mean that you're not really being a salesperson? You're almost giving them the full picture. And I don't know if I would do that if I were you in your shoes. Again, I'm sure you're hearing that from people. And I'm curious, like, what you would say to them and why you went, actually, no, I'm going to be transparent about everything this buyer needs to know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I did get it. A lot of people, a lot of colleagues that I've had this conversation had asked me the same question. Like, what would you say that? Why would you just say something like, yeah, you just it's a seasonal thing, or you just need to invest a little bit more in X, Y, Z, and kind of just like market the business more aggressively. I think like for me, it comes down to like my core values. I'm treating a seller how I would want to be treated as a buyer, right? The one thing that I don't want happening is someone acquiring the business in a way that doesn't really give him the full set of tools he needs to run the website, along, even though like, you can argue that's not the seller responsibility, right? But for me, it's just like I'm treating them as I want to be treated as a buyer. So there's your own reputation as a seller that follows you after that.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. I mean, it's like you really do have to think about both sides. What would you do on the other side? And understand that if you set that person up for success just by giving them like the truth or the full picture up front, I think it reaps the rewards. So I was curious, Doron. I was just wondering, like, how did that play out for you?
Yeah, the result was a full list offer the very next day.
Wow. Okay, so full list offer after everything that you put together. I mean, what was your reaction? Were you surprised?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised. I mean, looking back at it, I think this particular buyer, he was not only looking to buy his first business, but he was looking to buy it from someone that can really help them migrate and teach them so they have the tools they need to operate the new business. So I think the educational part was really important to him. But yeah, I was definitely surprised. I got a full list offer the very next day, and was also right before a price update. So it was at the end of the month, and had that buyer waited a few more days, they could have waited for the price adjustments, and they could have, gotten a lower list price on that. And I told him, I said, look, you can wait a few more days. There are other people interested in the business, but just so you know, because I didn't know if they were aware of that option. But I just told them, look, if you wait a few more days, the price is going to update. This past month's revenue was also a bit lower than last year. And, he heard me, but he was determined. He was like, no, that's fine. Let's move forward. I don't want to give anyone a chance to also bid on the business. So I'm fine, to just go through with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that you did that. Again, I mean, you really did look out for this buyer as someone who was a first timer. And of course, I can put myself in the buyer's shoes for a minute and go, I'd understand if I was in their position, knowing that you were an experienced seller who'd be able to help me buy the business and you were transparent through that whole thing. I wouldn't want to lose you either. I wouldn't want to lose the deal, but I wouldn't want to lose you as a source of help through the next steps, the business ownership. I guess on that front, what sort of sparked my interest was this idea that so other people could be in a similar boat as you. They've got this business that, it might be declining or it might have a flaw. And that would make a lot of sellers pretty nervous, going like, gosh, all I want to do is make sure that I have a good exit and nobody looks at this potential flaw in the business and doesn't want it. But then, you did the opposite where you're like, yeah, I'm going to be transparent about every single bit of this. And it worked out. So for those who might be in a similar position, can you just maybe give a piece of advice for people who might have a business with flaws and how they can still manage to, be transparent yet market it during the deal process?
Yeah, I think you have to be transparent, because if you're not being transparent and something negative pops up close to sale or doing sale, that's kind of hard to recover from, because there's not a lot of trust at that point. So it's definitely, first advice would be, 100% transparency. And then the second piece of advice is also like, look at the people that are interested in the business and see if there's a good personal synergy there. Because if there isn't, that makes the sale process a lot harder. If you don't feel that there is a good chemistry with the buyer, that's going to make things a lot harder along the way, especially if you haven't been transparent or you missed like core detail, and that comes out, closer or in the inspection period or like right before you're about to seal the deal. That's going to be really hard to recover from.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic point. Like, you got to understand that, I mean, something that could indicate a breach of trust, it's kind of game over. You're not going to be able to get back from that. Well, I mean, what I like about what you did is that you were kind of going above and beyond to offer this help, to understand somebody that was a new buyer, but then also to offer them help, it sounded like post deal. And so I was wondering, is that something that you suggest to other sellers, to come up with a post-sale support system? And do you think that that might be the game changer for what could help close a deal?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that can help you close the deal. I think that's better also for our space as buyer and sellers, because in the past, I've also done some consulting work for people that have bought their website from people, and then they've encountered a lot of problems. They were not ready for them. And their response was also like, they were really disappointed with the seller, and they weren't very likely to buy another content site from that seller or from anyone else. Especially if you have a portfolio and you think about the fact that you might have multiple exits. That's something that can really serve you, because like, there's a good probability that you'll be able to sell more businesses to the same buyer. If they're succeeding, they want to scale up their own portfolio, then you already have the trust and relationship established. That's going to be really easy for you to execute more deals. That's also something that's going to build your reputation. So where you exiting again for Empire Flippers, and the Empire Flippers knows you and know that they know that the kind of seller you are. And that's also something that can really serve you. Again, I think like the trust factor is huge, and specifically for when dealing with people that are not as experienced as you in the space.
Yeah, I think that's huge. It's some really excellent points there. One thing that came to my mind is we're talking about, best practices and what you should do. Would you say that there are things that buyers and sellers might neglect or miss during the sales or negotiation process? So, let's talk about it in the vein of what questions might either party miss that could, derail things down the road.
Yeah, I think for buyers, the main thing they overlook a lot of time is the amount of effort required to either keep the business in the same level of revenue or increase it. So let's say, for example, you buy a site that costs $100,000, but how much is it going to cost you to really invest in it or to have a thought out growth plan for the site that can take that site from X to Y or even maintain it at the same level? That's the key, because that's where you can really plan your budget and capital allocation and take that into consideration to really understand if that site is the right site for you. Because if you have, for example, $100,000 to invest, but the growth plan required is another 25 or 30K, you should really get that into your acquisition plan and understand, is that type of capital that you can take from current profits and inject that back in the business, or would that require you to set up, additional capital that you need post acquisition? Because if you have that, you can really have the full picture on what kind of ROI you can expect, and really plan out your acquisition in a way that's set up for success. Because the other alternative, okay, you invested $100,000, but now only after acquiring the business you realize that, okay, I can like basically maintain it for that specific monthly profit, but man, now I have to invest in new content and new links, and it's suddenly like there is an additional $15,000 to $20,000 I haven't thought about. That can really disrupt your chances to grow the site. So as long as the buyer is aware of that, that's something that I think is one of the crucial things to plan before acquiring a site.
I'm really glad that you brought that up and put numbers to it as well, just to kind of put all that in perspective. You're totally right. It is one of those things that people get in and they have their investors' hats on, but they're not really thinking about just what they might need to potentially put into the site to take it to the next level, or what could happen in the case something wrong or something goes wrong. So it's all good to take note of. I'm curious, as somebody who's been a veteran in the space, content site world for just a while, where do you see the industry heading in 2022? Do you think there are any trends that content site owners should be aware of?
Yeah, in terms of trends, I think it's going to grow substantially. I think there is, if you just look at the amount of listings on Empire Flippers, that's consistently growing since Corona hit last year. And I think it's going to just keep on growing this year. I think a lot of new buyers, I think there's a lot of capital around. I think that a lot of new buyers, and we see that with added liquidity each and every month to the marketplace. I feel that could also like push up multiples even higher than this year. So 2022 would be a good year for sellers. In terms of trends, more specifically, let's say to the content space, I think it comes down to really make sure that you have the quality required. If we look at the recent updates we had earlier this year in April, where Google released an algorithm update that they mentioned specifically product reviews and how those should be treated. I think that's just the first step. I think the next step after that would be that they're just going to focus on the quality of the content, regardless of if health related, if it's product reviews related, even if it's something more general, like if you look at pets, for example, like all the different behavioral aspects. I think that's going to be a growing focus. So as an operator, you have to make sure that you have the quality of the content, really nailed down. You need to make sure that you work with people that have a specific interest in the niche, that they know what they're talking about. I think it's going to get harder to succeed if you're just pumping up new content, pumping out new links, but the quality factor isn't there. I think those sites are going to be more susceptible to higher drops in traffic and revenue.
Yeah, I'm certainly glad that you brought up the algorithm changes and what Google is looking for nowadays. I know that's very much top of mind for a lot of site owners, and they're trying to figure out, is what I'm doing working? Or if it is working now, will it continue to work into next year? So I think that perspective, all those insights that you just mentioned, very good to keep top of mind as we move into this next year. Well, Doron, it's been really interesting to hear your story. I love that you brought this particular business to the table. I'd say it's a case study within itself on what happens when you decide to be transparent as a seller and you're there and you think about the buyer and their perspective. When you manage to do that and you do that right, like get a full deal or full list offer the next day, it's a pretty great outcome. So I appreciate you sharing that story. Before we wrap up, I just had a couple rapid fire questions for you, if you're cool with that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So talk to me about what are the best hidden growth opportunities for sellers looking to exit in this next year?
Okay, so sellers right before they're looking to exit.
Yeah.
Well, right before you exit, I would make sure that you tapped into all potential revenue sources. So, for example, if you're a content site and you don't have ads running on the site, so instead of saying like, hey, like potential increase in revenue if you add ads to the site, so actually like add the ads, pre-exit, like a month or two before. So you're showing like this fresh new revenue stream on top of your current revenue. So when buyers look at that, they see, oh, and there's a new revenue stream they just got started with. So, and that hasn't been implemented across the whole trailing 12 months in the P&L. So there's seems like the revenue is growing, there's a good opportunity. So make sure you tap into that. Make sure if you haven't worked on, so if it's a content site, if you haven't worked on optimizing some of the affiliate deals, that's actually a good time to start, because you can say like, hey, and for example, we recently, optimized the percentage we get on that product. So P&L is, you can see in this past month, it grow, it's expected to grow even more. So you're showing that instead of just listing potential growth opportunities, you've kind of had a couple of quick wins that the buyer, is seeing like hands-on that they've increased revenue. So that can give you an additional boost in earnings and also an additional boost in kind of the momentum you're building for the business.
Great answer. Okay, so what would you say are best tools or resources that people can use to help prepare their site for sale?
So I would say like read a few case studies, see how other people have done these transactions. Make sure that you have the technical side of the site taken care of. So make sure the site is fast. Make sure that you've done your technical SEO and site growth, that you're fixing any faults. So from a technical standpoint, because when buyers look at these sites, especially if they're a bit more seasoned, they'll run these tests and they'll say like, they'll look at things like page speed. So even though I can say from my experience, it's not a huge ranking factor, right? But most people, if they see that the sites kind of have a low score, it might turn them down a bit. So, make sure that's taken care of. Make sure other technical things are working. So that way, you can kind of take those little things out the way that can turn down some buyers.
Awesome. Okay, so final question here. What has been your funniest moment working in the online business world?
Oh, I don't know if there was one specific. I think just since COVID, just doing all the Zoom and Google Meet with no cameras, with your 1 year old in your arms, hoping they won't cry for the meeting. I think that's probably up there. But yeah, apart from that, nothing specific onto mind.
Maybe it might help with video sometimes, as long as they can see the baby. It's just for context. Like, okay, well,
Yeah,
I think we're all doing the same thing, right? We've got babies in our arms or
yeah,
dogs or cats climbing in front of our computers. Like,
yeah.
said it before, we all need some
That's
grace.
true. I typically either have a cat or a baby in my lap when I'm doing interviews or calls. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I totally get that. It's like you're just looking at your baby, you're praying to the baby God, like, please be quiet. I don't know if you'll stay quiet, but please be quiet. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, this has been really fun, Doron, catching up with you and hearing about this really cool case study of a business. I think it's awesome. It gives some good perspective for those looking to sell and even buy as well. So thank you again for coming on and sharing that with us.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I hope you've walked away with a bit of new insight that'll help you in your digital entrepreneurship journey. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To learn more about businesses available for sale at Empire Flippers, click the link in the description or visit empireflippers.com/marketplace. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.